Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to be very brief. However, I'd like to essentially set the scene to explain to you the rationale behind the budget itself. Indeed, the rationale behind the COVID-19 budget response. As you know, that we delivered for want of a better word, a supplementary budget post our first case that we had of COVID-19. We immediately knew the implications of what would be of having a first case. Obviously, it meant that tourism suddenly stopped, and various other activities in the garment industry, etc., had also come to a grinding halt. And that, of course, would have an impact on government revenues, have an impact in the ability of businesses to be able to carry on with their normal activities, and have an enormous impact, of course, on the employment sector itself. So we had put in place a COVID-19 budget response, following which, of course, we have now the new budget that's been approved by Parliament last week on Friday. The reality of the matter is that COVID-19 has presented a challenge not just to us, but all the countries in the world. The world economy has never seen such a dramatic impact and sudden impact on the day-to-day business, the day-to-day economies, the day-to-day financial markets, the day-to-day air travel around the world and globally. And never before in the history of the world, when the world has been so highly globalized, has there been such a dramatic shutdown of borders. Today, you can't travel essentially outside of Fiji to any other country. Nobody will accept you, except perhaps with some exceptions. Similarly, of course, Fiji won't accept people unless they go through, for example, quarantine measures. That has an enormous impact on the economy of Fiji. The Fijian economy, of course, is very much, has a large percentage of its GDP built around the tourism sector, 40%. Of course, there are many other ancillary services linked to that, ancillary industries, ancillary businesses that are linked to the tourism sector itself. Sometimes, we tend to talk about tourism quite a lot, but we also tend to forget that there is also other segments within the economy, as I mentioned, for example, the garment industry. We have over 8,000 people employed in the garment industry. When your garment market is predominantly targeted towards the Australian and New Zealand markets, you won't be able to sell your garments if there's a lockdown in Auckland, there's a lockdown in Sydney, there's a lockdown in Melbourne, because the demand actually comes from there. People don't go out and buy those garments. You have a couple of garment factories, one in particular in Suva, that essentially makes and specializes in rugby jerseys. They supply all the way up to UK. So when you actually don't have sporting events being played, when you don't want specialized jerseys for the semi-final or finals, obviously there's no demand for that. And those production lines need to stop, come to a grinding halt, or have to reduce the hours that they do work. That was the context within which we had to deliver the budget. Of course, we had to also, from one perspective, seize the opportunity, because in a way it gave us the opportunity to look at many things afresh. When you don't actually have, for example, revenue coming in through stamp duties, when you don't have revenue coming through your ECAL, your STT, obviously it gives you an opportunity to be able to re-look at all those taxation regimes, those taxation systems. And you have to actually contextualize it vis-a-vis what other countries are also doing. So for the tourism sector, some of you would have already seen, even a couple of months back, Phuket was advertising $99 US dollars for 5 nights in Phuket in a 4-star hotel. We have had discussions through third parties in Bali, for example, the 5-star owners are there saying, as soon as we open up, we want a lion's share of the market. And we don't really care if we don't actually make a margin on it. Even if we make a loss for the first few months, we just simply want to capture the market. And that's what we have to understand. That's the level of competition that we have to face. When you have 600,000 Australians losing jobs in 1 month, the ability of the Australian market, or the Australians who actually may travel, or may say travel twice a year, the level of disposable income available at their disposal is not there anymore. Same thing with the New Zealand market. So we have to understand that set of dynamics and work within that set of dynamics, but at the same time be creative about it. So it gave us numerous opportunities in respect of what we can do and how we can look at things afresh. If you look at the budget itself, you'll see, your standard budget analysis a lot of people take is that, well, how much did this ministry get? How much did that ministry get? What was the reduction in that area? Overall, of course, we have tightened the belt in respect of government expenditure. We have not, for example, cut civil service pay because we need them to be employed. We need them to continue to get that funding, but we have done some adjustments. So, for example, you get time off in lieu of overtime. They used to get a meal allowance of $20 for a meal allowance. Now we've cut it down to $10. So those are the kind of measures we've taken. So, for example, civil servants who used to get what we call rural and maritime allowance, if they went and taught, for example, in a rural area or deep rural area or maritime area, they would get an additional amount of money on top of their normal salary. So that we've suspended for a period of time. Apart from those measures, of course, the different respective ministries have had budgetary cuts where we could do so. But there are certain strategic expenditures that we've continued with and indeed increased those expenditures. So, for example, with agriculture, Ministry of Agriculture has received additional funding. Poverty, women and children poverty alleviation has received additional funding. Police have received additional funding. As you know, many people don't like the curfew lifted because they believe it, stabilizes law and order because there's a lot of unemployment, so therefore people feel a lot more secure if there's actually a curfew. But obviously you need to build capacity within the police force itself so that it allows for the recruitment of new police officers, the regularization of special constables, the promotions of various police officers within the ranks, and of course, as you know, we've already had announced some years back, or a couple of years back, about the modernization of the Fijian police force, and this is the fulfillment of phase 2. So there's 3 other phases to go. So those, ministries have, for example, forestry, where we are now investing a lot in machinery, so people in the rural, in particular in the maritime areas, get access to machinery to be able to harvest the pine lots that they have on the islands to be able to build their homes. Those are the type of investments that we've carried out. So apart from the expenditure, of course, we have also, in respect of tourism itself, announced a $60 million, what we call a recovery rebate package, working with Fiji Airways, where we will subsidize $400 per tourist for the first 150,000 tourists that actually come to Fiji, or actually book and spend with Fiji Airways and the various hotels. So in short, and Andre can give you more details about this. Essentially, it's open to all the properties in Fiji. They need to work with Fiji Airways. They will get packaged with a special airfare together with the room rates. Now, prior to the announcement of the tax cuts itself, we had said that at least those hotels must bring down their cost by at least 45% to be able to reap the benefits of this particular package. We have already stated, and we're on record for saying this, that we've always believed that there can be huge room for improvement in respect of reducing the cost in F&B, in food and beverage in the hotels. Many of you would agree that you should not really be paying $12 or $15 a stubby at a hotel, or paying $15 for a bottle of water at a hotel. This is why people tend to go out to the supermarkets and buy and then bring it back in. And you don't need to pay a bowl of chips for $20 even before taxes. The reality of the matter is I can get a stubby for $2 in Bali on the beach. I can buy chips for $2 even before pre-COVID. So you can imagine what they're going to do now. So, apart from that, what we've also said is that to be part of the package, they need to reduce their cost by at least 45%. The tourists can pay now, but travel at any other point in time. The reality of the matter is that for most businesses, a lot of people here are business people, I can see, that you have cash flow issues. Whilst you maintain your buildings, you still need to pay insurance premiums. If the Hilton Hotel is empty, they still have to pay the insurance premium. Could be a few $1,000,000. They can't not let the insurance lapse. So if they are part of this package, they pay now, they may travel in November next year, but at least Fiji Airways and the hotel that's participated in that, or whatever other tourism entity has participated in that will actually be able to get the cash now. And the idea is that people can actually defer the time in which they can travel. You know, some may even travel in 2022. But that's the type of thing that we're doing. We will actually pay the rebate once the person lands their foot in Fiji. So that's the incentive we've given. We've also, of course, provided a number of other incentives in respect of ensuring that, you know, we get the borders open. We are constantly talking, talking, for example, I spoke to the Foreign Minister of Australia yesterday, discussions with the Kiwis also. We don't publicize all these discussions because a lot of these discussions are actually quite delicate. We need to be able to resolve a lot of these matters behind the scenes. As you know, there's a lot of talk around the Tasman bubble, trans-Tasman bubble, which is between Australia and New Zealand. Our Prime Minister announced now a couple of months back about the Bula bubble, the Pacific Pathway, and also, of course, about the blue lanes. The blue lanes, of course, would know, and I'll probably just very quickly go through this. You can ask questions later, where we allow people to bring in the yachts into Fiji. We treat the traveling time at sea as the quarantine period. So, you know, normally it takes about 5 to 7 days for a yacht to come from Auckland to Nadi, and if nobody gets on, gets off, if it takes them 5 days, then the balance out of the 14 days, which is 9 plus 5 is 14, so 9 days they actually serve in quarantine between Denarau and Wailoaloa, with the assistance of the RFMF and, of course, the Fijian police force. And once they've done that, of course, then they are free to roam around. They do the COVID-19 tests, and of course, it creates, brings in money into the economy, and then we get some business moving. So far, we have had over 20 yachts that have come in. We expect quite a few more in the next few months ahead. So that's the blue lanes. The other one, Pacific Pathway, we've said that we want to try and open the lanes with Tonga, Tuvalu, and Kiribati. Because essentially for Tuvalu and Kiribati, we're the only conduit for them to the rest of the world. A lot of them do want to travel, and of course they have to, however, serve compulsory quarantine days in Fiji, because there are, of course, certain sensitivities around health measures. We are the only independent country in the South Pacific to have an independent WHO certified testing facility for COVID-19. The only other countries, they're not actually countries, they're territories, which is Tahiti and New Caledonia, the French territories. So we need to obviously take advantage of that. We have recently, for example, I think it was Tuvalu, Kiribati, they had some of the citizens came from India for medical treatment, and they paid for them to stay in Fiji for 21 days quarantine facilities, which was funded by them. They used our facilities, and then they transited back to their country. So that's the kind of role that Fiji is also playing in that respect. The Bula bubble very, very quickly is open for Australia and New Zealand, where people can actually come. They need to have home quarantine or equivalent in Australia and New Zealand. New Zealand, of course, is becoming slightly different because New Zealand is very close to becoming COVID contained, which we are. Australia obviously is not. Victoria is under massive lockdown. I think yesterday or day before yesterday, the minister was telling us that they had the highest number of deaths and the highest number of cases in one day in Victoria, largest so far. There are certain parts of course, Sydney that are now locked down. There's also interstate lockdown, so Queensland is not accepting or quarantine people from ACT, and also certain parts of New South Wales. So there are those kind of internal intricacies within Australia itself. But as far as we are concerned with the Bula bubble, what we have said, if an Australian is able to do a 14 days quarantine, do a COVID-19 test from Australia, give the certificate to us, they come to Fiji, they get off, and they have what we call the VIP lanes, the vacation lanes, and then they go through that to designated resorts that will take only tourists from those countries. The hotel itself becomes a bubble in itself. The staff all have to live on site. Everybody's on site. They have their holiday, then they go back via the VIP lanes. That's obviously something that we have said. We are working through many of the intricate details with that. And of course, we have also had interest. I've just received a phone call from the Permanent Secretary for Commerce, Tourism and Trade, about some of the movies production houses. They want to come back to Fiji. Again, we're looking at one particular production house is looking at a spend of about $33 to $34 million in Fiji itself. And, they obviously have to go through the quarantine facilities, and we give a 70% rebate, as announced a couple of years back. So they are the sort of pathways we've opened. As far as the tourism sector is open, as far as the borders are concerned, if you see the bulk of the budget announcement is also to do with incentivizing domestic investment, incentivizing domestic investors, and also helping in the ease of doing business. So we've got rid of stamp duties. I think many people are still coming to terms with that because you're so used to paying stamp duty, everybody cannot digest the fact that stamp duties will be no more or is no more. Similarly, you no longer need business licenses, and again, people are finding it hard to digest. The rationale behind that, of course, is that every business, however, big or small, must be registered with the company's office. That's all required. If you want to open Sarita's Canteen, we would like it to be registered. Pennyasi's, clothes needs to be registered with the company's office. You go and hire rent out your shop, start selling your clothes, start having your canteen operational. That's what we want. However, of course, if there are certain businesses that require more regulatory oversight, so for example, you want to open up a restaurant, you'll have to get the health sign-off. We don't want you cutting the meat on the floor and all those kind of things. So that sort of sign-off needs to be there for those types of businesses. Again, as you know, that we've got rid of STT. ECAL has been reduced from 10% to 5%. We need to, of course, maintain ECAL because, as we saw, that pandemic or no pandemic, cyclones will still come. The seas are still rising. We had Cyclone Harold in the middle of all of this. It does become quite expensive when you actually have to maintain social distancing, when we have people that could actually contaminate or have community spread. So we had to, the logistics becomes a lot more expensive. But the reality of the matter is we do have to address climate change, so ECAL is still there. However, we've also, from another perspective, we provide a number of incentives. As you know, with the tariff structure, there's over 1,600 line items that we have reduced or completely got rid of. We've also taken a more sort of nuanced approach to these tariff structures. Many people don't talk about it. Of course, the opposition don't have an idea about it too. But things like, for example, because we want to protect, for example, instant noodles that are made in Fiji. So you have CJ Patel and FMF. They make instant noodles, the 2-minute noodles. But because there's a general tariff code line, it included things like pasta and all other types of noodles that are not made in Fiji. So we have now a separate line item that instant noodle, there's a protection for them, which is 32%. But all the other pasta, noodle, family-related products have come down to 5%. So next time you go and eat your chow mein, the chow mein should be cheaper. So those noodles are not made in Fiji. And the hoteliers obviously need to reduce their price as far as noodles are concerned. So those are the kind of things we've done. There's about 1,600 items. All machinery, for example, in Fiji has been zero-rated now. So if you're an investor, you're buying machinery, whether it's large machinery, whether it's machinery or equipment that you use to measure the quality of the timber, the wetness, the dryness, the soil, any other product. So hopefully people get more ISO certification, etc. Makes it a lot more easier for them to be able to better place your products when you start exporting those products. So we've done that also. Similarly with the garments, because garments were made in Fiji, there was an overall protection. Any clothes that came into Fiji, new clothes, it was all 32%. But of course, as you know, most of the ladies will tell you, most of the clothes that you do buy, ready-made stuff, is not made in Fiji. Panties, underwear, singlets, all those kind of things, none of that is made in Fiji. But you still pay 32%. All been reduced to 5%. In fact, undergarments have been zero-rated. So, these are everyday items that people need to procure. Similarly, there are certain companies that in certain products, line items, you still got 15% because there are certain types of polo shirts, etc., that are made in Fiji. But there are other clothes that are not. So we've gone through with a fine-tooth comb looking at all these products to make it a lot more accessible from that perspective. Linked in that, one of the other, of course, agencies that has received increased funding is FCCC. The CEO is here, Joel, I see he's on the panel. We're giving an additional $300,000 to be able to monitor the fact that these duties on these products actually have come down quite significantly, and they obviously need to be passed on to the consumer. We've seen in the past, many of the food items a few years ago, we zero-rated it or brought it down to 5%, but they were never brought down. And one classic, of course, example is we reduced the duty on many of the baby products. We have a young population, a lot of babies, and they're all 32%. So for your baby wipes to other baby products, all used to be 32%. Some of it was zero-rated, some of it was brought down to 5%. But in fact, we saw the prices actually go up. The reality of the matter is that there's only one agent for that particular baby product. So, there's price gouging, there's monopolistic positions within the market, there's duopolistic position in the market, and FCCC is obviously the best place organization to be able to look at that. We've announced, of course, a number of incentives in respect of construction, accelerated depreciation. We've got tax write-offs. We've got incentives for businesses if they, for example, build warehouses, build buildings, if they're to invest, for example, in subdivision of lots. Now, a lot of people have said to me, okay, this is great, but what's the rationale behind that? The reality of the matter is that the rate of home ownership in Fiji is actually very low comparatively. So we need to increase the rate of home ownership. Many of your businesses, the people who work for you, they're probably living on some squatter land, or in places like Suva, they're living over some mangrove swamp, somewhere behind Remanga or Samambula, or wherever the case may be. And a lot of them are actually holding some fairly senior positions. So we need to be able to empower people by increasing the rate of home ownership. So we are working with the IFC in respect of that, but also we believe that the provisioning or making available of subdivided lots will go a long way. Will go a long way towards empowering people to own their own homes. So as part of that, we've also announced that we're making a housing grant available. If you earn less than $30,000, we give you a $30,000 grant. If you earn less than $50,000, sorry, you get a $30,000 grant to build your first home. Well, a financial institution like a bank. And that's a fairly substantial amount of money. Similarly, if you earn more than $50,000 but less than $100,000, we give you $20,000 to build your first home. The whole idea is to spur the construction sector. So, as you can see, the budget, there's a lot of focus on subdivision construction, because these sorts of projects and incentives aren't beholden to the borders actually opening up. So, you can go ahead and do a subdivision, because tourists are not going to come and buy the lot. It'll be the local who will buy a lot. It'll be the Fijian who will actually buy a lot. If you're going to build a warehouse, you may be pre-positioning yourself for the future. So those are the kind of incentives we've actually announced. So, we're urging quite a lot of people have come forward and said we want to take advantage of this. I just had a meeting last week with one of the largest supermarket chains. They want to build a massive bulk store and do some, baking, etc. in that area. A very massive project out here between Nadi and Lautoka. So there's quite a few. I've met with somebody this morning here in Nadi too. They've got, about 5 or 6 projects that are lined up. One of the key issues for us, of course, is that and we had a meeting 2 days ago, called a number of the agencies together, is the time it takes for the approvals to, come through. And we see that it's a combination of things, a combination of factors, I should say. One of them is the current legislative framework. If you look at the town and country planning laws, etc., a lot of these laws actually are fairly archaic. They were put in place in the 1970s and 80s. So, for example, the technology at that point in time was very different to what it is today. Just giving as an example, not necessarily, exactly the facts. That, in 1970s, for example, you should know this. In 1970s, for example, because the technology was not as, current, you probably can build, you have to build, say, 5 meters away from the riverbank. But now, because the technology has changed, you probably can build 2 meters closer to the riverbank. There are numerous examples like that we know time has changed, but the laws actually have not kept up to pace. The various response times within the laws, they're very sort of archaic. So we need to be able to change that, and we had some meetings around it, and we will see some changes in respect of that. Overall, I'd like to sort of come back to the economy. Our foreign reserves were at a very healthy level. The foreign reserves, of course, have now still being maintained. Of course, your foreign reserves get eaten up when you have a lot of economic activity and people import a lot of things. So obviously, that's one of the contributing factors. But the reality of the matter is that it's fairly healthy at the moment. We've got approximately about 8 months' worth of import value in the foreign reserves. At the same time, we've seen the funding of it, of course, all of this. Where are we getting the funding from? Generally, over the past number of years, what we've done, we've maintained, government tends to go out, all governments in the world tend to go out and borrow money from the market. Our approach has always been that we keep 70% of our borrowing should be domestically and 30% should be from offshore. The reason, of course, being quite simple, that we don't like to have foreign currency exposure. Because if you borrow in US dollars, if the value goes up, you have to spend a lot more money in terms of the repayments. So we maintain a 70-30 mix. This time around, of course, given the situation, it's completely unprecedented. We've tended to go for more offshore borrowing. There's a lot of funding available to us at very concessionary rates, and some of them actually at 0% interest rates. A lot of it is to do with the fact that we have been, plugging away for the past 4 or 5 years. Previously, for example, the World Bank would not give us concessionary funding. But we've said because of climate vulnerabilities, we need to be put in that particular category of countries. And so therefore we're getting IDA funds for our budget financing. So we've now gone for more offshore borrowing. So when you have actually more offshore borrowing, it means that you build up your foreign reserves also. So we like to keep our foreign reserves at very healthy levels. So that's essentially, in a nutshell, what the landscape is as far as the budget is concerned, the rationale behind it. I'd like to be able to, with your permission, and Mr. President, to be able to from the floor. I think it's important to have this kind of free flow of exchange. I know I'm going against your program, but I think it'll be important to hear from us and hear, if you have any other questions regarding what I said, I'm quite happy to take those questions now. So our message with the budget, of course, has been that this is the ground realities on the ground. This is the situation that we are in. We need to be able to maintain a sort of positive approach to it, not unrealistic, but positive approach to it. So we have to generate economic activity. So what can we do to generate economic activity domestically is all those things that I've announced to you in the incentives that we have given to spur domestic investment. There are quite a few, we know, businesses that are fairly cashed up. What our approach has been is this: don't react when the borders open. You be proactive now and pre-position yourself. Because when the borders actually do open, and they will open at some point in time, I cannot tell you whether it's going to open next week, or it'll open in 6 months' time, 1 year's time, or 3 months' time. We don't know that. Somebody may come up with a vaccine. And talking about vaccines, what our approach has been with all the international agencies is that if a vaccine does come out, the vaccine must be treated as a public good, not as a commodified, product. Because if it suddenly becomes all commodified, then essentially we'll be at the bottom of the chain in terms of accessing the vaccine, because everybody's going to rush for it. And of course you have the pricing issues surrounding that. So, we are talking to organizations like the World Bank and IMF, and Fiji currently is the chair of the Small States Forum in the World Bank group, so we are taking advantage of that. So, when the borders do open up, there'll be a huge flurry of activity. But please do understand this. There is going to be a new norm. The world is not going to be the same. You have to understand that. We've got people now all over the world, for example. Pilots are everywhere now. A lot of pilots are unemployed. I'm receiving messages from former Fiji Airways pilots who've been working in the Emirati countries, in UAE, flying for Etihad, Emirates, Qatar, Oman, saying, is there a job? Some people's, for example, interest in certain sectors of the economy will no longer be there because it may say there's uncertainty. We have, of course, allocated $100 million for unemployment benefits in the budget, of which we said $5 million will be used through an interministerial collaboration to retrain people or reskill people. There may be certain people in the hotel industry saying, look, this is, I don't know when the borders are going to open, but I want to get into some other area. So the example that I've used previously is that that person may actually have a particular proclivity, say, for the IT sector or telecommunications. They may be very good at it, but they work in a hotel. There are obviously jobs going in the IT sector, in particular at this point in time in telecommunications, a lot of data usage, etc. So if they, with a bit of upskilling, they may be able to get a job in those areas. So that's the type of incentives that we are looking at. But there's no doubt, of course, we have to deal with the unemployment issues. This is why we're working very closely with FNPF. And when I say working closely with FNPF, it does not mean that all the money is coming from FNPF. Government is actually supplementing that unemployment benefit also. And as we see, as the weeks go by, when a lot of the people whose general accounts get depleted, government is now fully funding those unemployment benefits. So those of you who may not know, we are now giving $220 a fortnight for anybody that's unemployed, that's lost a job as a result of COVID-19. And that's $220 a fortnight. We also now are saying those people who have had reduced hours. So if you're working in a garment factory, and instead of working the 5 days a week, you're now working 2 days a week, then you get a certain amount of money that funds you for the 3 days in a week that you've actually missing out from. So those are the sort of incentives we put in place. Overall, the idea is to build that positivity around it, pre-position ourselves. We're also talking to our some of the other countries in looking at other industries within Fiji that can be developed. Unfortunately, prior to COVID-19, for example, we were talking to some people in Silicon Valley about getting coding, for example, done in Fiji. There's a lot of young people in Fiji, very IT savvy, and there's a couple of former Fijians we found. There's one in particular whose job is actually to help American IT companies relocate offshore and do the outsourcing offshore. So we talked about doing that for Fiji, but also developing courses at Fiji National University, short-term courses, for example, on coding. That, of course, has come to a bit of a halt because nobody knows the certainty around that, but that, again, will pick up too. So we are looking at that. We also believe there's opportunities in the manufacturing and assembly lines. There are some countries who no longer perhaps want to have the assembly lines and production lines, in places like China and faraway countries. They want to bring it closer to home. Fiji, of course, has got a good brand. Climate change credentials, environmental credentials are pretty good. We want to be able to build upon that. FNPF, together with the Ministry of Commerce and Trade, is working together with IFC to build a IT/manufacturing, clean manufacturing subdivision in Navutu, which FNPF has bought some land from FSC. So they're putting up a subdivision there. The reason why we chose Lautoka, of course, was because of the proximity to Nadi airport and, of course, proximity to the seaport. So those are the kind of strategic thinking that's going on behind the scenes. Quite a few other areas that we are looking at. So with that in mind, thank you for coming. Great to see so many of you in large numbers. We'll also be going around Fiji later on and meeting up with specific groups. I have with me at the back, of course, the FRCS team that's there, and also the Shiri, who's head of our fiscal planning in the Ministry of Economy, is here. They can also answer any questions that you may have. And also, I wanted to do my last plug. I'm sure most of you don't have the KFiji app on. I hope those of you, if you have the KFiji app on, please. Great. Excellent. We can do a lot better. Because the reality of the matter is this, and it's very simple. It's very, people should not view these things from a political perspective. When you talk to countries like Australia and New Zealand, as I mentioned, I think in Parliament also, about 2 weeks ago, I was listening, on that week of Parliament, I was listening to Scott Morrison, and he was talking about the capacity and the way to mitigate those issues arising from COVID-19. And very proudly he was saying 40% of Australians have actually downloaded the app that they have, equivalent to KFiji app. That's actually relatively a high percentage. The source code that they use is similar to what we use, is similar to what Singapore uses. We actually got it from Singapore. Balakrishna, who's the foreign minister, we have a good relationship with him, who's foreign minister for Singapore. We are able to, very quickly get the app from them. And when an Australian tourist, for example, or New Zealand tourist, is going to assess whether they want to go to Fiji or not, they will look at your health measures. That's the reality. I mean, apart from pricing, they'll also look at the health measures. If there's another country that's going to, for example, offer them a better health framework, they will go to that country because people are now very specifically concerned about COVID-19. That's a reality. If we are able to say to them, look guys, 30%, 40%, 50% of Fijians actually have the app on, they will feel safe. You are all in this room. If tomorrow, God forbid, assuming that I get COVID-19, I'll use myself as an example, if I get COVID-19, I'll go and then they'll say, who have you been in contact with for more than 15 minutes in close proximity? I won't remember all of you. I won't. There may be photographs that may prove it, but how do we trace you? Or get in touch with you, I should say. All the phone does is simply, if this is the phone, at the moment my app is on, it's bouncing off your phones, whoever has the app on. It's a Bluetooth. And all it's doing is registering the number. I was very surprised when I had people asking me, will it know where we were? No, it won't. It won't know that we met in this room. It won't know where we met in the hotel room. It won't know where we're holding hands. They won't know it all. All it does is records the number. It stores the number for 28 days. On the 29th day, that number will drop off. So, those of you who have your app on now, after 28 days, all your numbers will drop off. And assuming that I have COVID-19, I go to the Ministry of Health, I go to the hospital, they say, who have you been in close contact with? Because we need to get in touch with these people so they can come in and get tested. So they won't go out just in case they've been infected and spread it to the rest of the community. It's very simple. And then the Ministry of Health will send me a code, a PIN number. I have to agree to that. I type in the PIN in my phone. Then all my numbers for the past 28 days, not all the numbers, only those people I've been in contact with for more than 15 minutes. 15 minutes or more within 2 meters. If you're standing out there in the foyer, it won't register. It goes to a dashboard at Ministry of Health. All they'll do is see the number and they'll call the number. Excuse me, you've been in contact with a person who's had COVID-19. Can you please come in quickly and get yourself tested? That's all they'll do. And all studies have shown that digital contact tracing is the fastest and best way to trace people. It's very simple. So please understand, when you're actually downloading the app, it's not just about protecting yourself, but it's also about protecting the economic future of Fiji. Because that's the new norm. And that's what people look at. Oh, they've got an app. How many people have downloaded it? Oh, 5%. Not working. Not probably a safe place to go. The other one is there, he's got 50%. It's very simple mathematics. So please, that's my plug to you. That's my only sell to you. I'm quite happy to now take questions. Thank you.